So this is a campaign diary with a little bit of a difference. We're going to be following two different sets of characters. We'll actually reference a few others as well. This campaign has been played multiple times, and we'll be following two different groups of player characters as they go through the same campaign. Because if we say that the players are empowered, this is player-led, this is a sandbox world, the players' decisions really matter, then they have to genuinely really matter. The campaign cannot follow a single path. It cannot go on rails. We need to see how the player characters can really influence the world and really influence the evolving story, and how we as GMs, DMs, story guides, etc., how we cope with this as the world changes, morphs in front of us, how we deviate from the expected story that we thought was going to come out because our brilliant creative players have done all sorts of weird stuff instead. So we'll mainly be focusing on two very different groups of player characters and referencing a couple of others. But we'll start with the arrival of one group, and they have been sent to the county of Corrend in order to set up a settlement. They're going to build themselves a new home by some old ruins up in a valley to the north, and they're going to investigate this. The ruins are expected to have magical powers or some sort of supernatural connection, and the player characters over a couple of years, possibly several years, will be investigating this. And then, of course, once they've secured and learned how to exploit this resource, they're going to have to defend it, and there will be threats. But we start off in a muddy courtyard of a priory. The player characters, in order to settle up at the ruins, have got to get permission. They need to go to the count of this county and they need to get his permission to set up a settlement there. But they have arrived at the time of the annual fair. Traders have come in from hundreds of miles around. The peasants from the farming villages are thronging the streets. There isn't really anywhere to stay. The player characters have managed to scrounge a place to stay at a priory. And here this morning, it's a nice blue sky. It rained heavily around midnight. It's really muddy, but it's fresh and it's pleasant. But there's an argument in the courtyard. And a couple of local farmers want access to the priory church so that they can pray before the relics of a local saint. The relics of the saint are her bones, which are held in a casket in the church. And one of the brothers from the priory is making some really feeble, desperate excuses about why they can't go in and pray before the relics. The peasants go, and the brother turns to two of the player characters and, desperate, begs for their help. The priory has no prior, there's nobody in charge here at the moment, they're waiting for a replacement, and now a catastrophe has struck them. Their great holy relics have been stolen in the middle of the night. Can the player characters help? So it's a fairly easy standard setup for the player characters. We've introduced a little bit about the world. They understand the count rules the county. They understand a little bit about popular piety. They understand that there's an annual trade fair and they've arrived in the middle of it and so forth. We've set the scene a little and we're giving them what seems to be a nice, simple, linear quest. Right, a thing has been stolen, investigate it, go and get it back. Most experienced players will understand roughly what's going on here. This is a nice introductory adventure. It is, but it's going to get more complicated. So, our players at this point are a group of 4 characters. One of them seems to be a slightly eccentric farmer called Gishard Exbonasagus, and he has with him a parish priest who doesn't currently have a parish, Father Otto. And they've got a couple of guards. Quite why a peasant farmer and a humble parish priest need 2 guards is not clear, but of course this isn't just a peasant farmer, right? The guy's a sorcerer. So they set about investigating what's happened with the lost relics. Now, there are loads of ways they could investigate this, but the way they choose to do it is to focus on the people. They want to know who was in the priory last night. Pain in the neck for a GM, because presumably there's various other guests and we don't have a huge list of this, so we have to hand wave this a little bit, but let them have the key conversations they're going to have. And in the end they realise that as well as the relics, another person is missing as well. A young, very pious apparently, slightly neurotic, maybe not too bright brother called Brother Gill. He also disappeared last night, and the front gates of the priory were found ajar. So they assume that he's left with the relics. He can't have gone into the city because the city gates are all closed at night. And so they ask about Brother Gill and where did he come from. And oh yes, he grew up on a farm just a little way to the east of here. So the player characters go, right, he's probably gone back to his home. Don't know why he's stolen the relics. Maybe he didn't steal the relics, but he knows who did and he's run away. He's our lead, we're following him. So here's a group of players who are really interested in the people. They've made no effort at all to look for physical clues. They haven't looked for tracks in the muddy courtyard. I told them it's a muddy courtyard, you'd think it'll have tracks. Not interested. Their sole interest is in looking for information about the people. So they head off to the east. And now as a GM you're thinking, oh, they're going to have to talk to about a dozen farmers to get anywhere, so I'll give them something here to make it easier. They're going in the right direction. They've got absolutely the right idea. Brother Gill has taken the relics and has fled back to lands that he knows, a place he's comfortable, a place he grew up, which is about 8 miles to the east. And so I tell them, as you travel along the muddy road in front of you, there's a pair of parallel lines, which you're also following, which haven't been overlaid by much pedestrian traffic this morning, so probably they were last night. And the players think, okay, he's dragging something. So when these two parallel lines head off towards a set of isolated woods, the players go, great, he's in the isolated woods. So here we are, our 2 guards, our priest and our, quotes, humble farmer, head off into the woods where they find a cottage or a semi-abandoned shack. And in there, the brother has barricaded himself in. He's panicking, he's not going to let them in, he doesn't know who they are, he knows there's a conspiracy to steal these relics. Maybe the player characters are part of this. How do they win his trust? And while they're trying, another group turns up. A big bloke, basic armour, axe, kind of Dane axe kind of thing, and 3 peasant spearmen, just local farmers who've been pressed into service. These folks aren't quite local, they're from further north, but they're clearly a soldier of some sort. Big soldier, but a soldier, and a group of peasant militia who've been pressed into service. Now, this is a classic GMing mistake. I haven't paid enough attention to the player characters' character sheets. I reckon that 4 against 4, when they've not got a non-combatant and a mage who's really a researcher, is probably going to be a tough fight for them. They've got a couple of fairly well-armed guards. The guards are going to take the brunt of it. Let's see how this fight goes. No, I haven't looked at the character sheets properly. Guichard ex Bonasagas is basically a researcher who's really interested in farming and plants, but he has the ability to take control of wooden shafts, like the wooden shaft on that Dane axe. So as the enemies advance, get out of here, we're taking our relics back. The player characters try and calm them down. It's like, we don't want to fight, we don't want to fight. As soon as it becomes apparent that there's going to be a fight, Guichard waves his arms, makes the correct gestures, and he is now controlling the Dane axe. That's a very short fight. The one serious combatant facing the player characters is now being beaten to death with his own axe. The 3 peasants who've just been told by their lord to go along and help, and they shouldn't have to do anything other than transport a box of relics, and they're now watching their leader getting beaten to death by his own axe with some unearthly force operating it. They do not want to fight. There are no morale rules in the game system we're using. It doesn't matter. A little bit of empathy. They're going to be thinking, are we safer surrendering or running? Their gut is to run. The players manage to persuade them, or the player characters manage to persuade them to not run, to stand and to talk. And the player characters are now in a situation where they've got 3 absolutely terrified but compliant peasants who are here to seize the relics. They've got the brother who they can now demonstrate to that they've defended from these people who would seize the relics. So he's calmed down, he's talking, and the players can talk, or the player characters can talk to these guys and find out what's happening. So Brother Gill overheard a conversation at the fair with a rough nobleman with a walking cane and his very tall axe-wielding bodyguard, talking to a couple of brothers whose backs were to him, so he wasn't sure who they were, about stealing the relics. So there's a conspiracy afoot, and he doesn't know who in his priory he can trust. So he prays through the night, and after midnight, when it stops raining, he seizes the relics and he runs with them. He hasn't really got a plan. He's just gone back to familiar ground. Maybe he'll manage to find a way of dragging them south to another abbey to keep them safe there. But they can't be safe at the priory if the brothers from the priory are thinking of stealing them. And this is a nobleman, and how much influence does he have? So Gil has run away. The peasants are from the north, from an area around a castle called Montrat, and their lord has said to them, we've arranged for a couple of brothers from the priory to give us back our relics, the relics that are rightfully ours, that my father was forced or tricked into handing over to these greedy monks. And we're going to take them back, and we're going to install them in a chapel on our own lands. And the peasants are like, yeah, absolutely, she was a local woman, she's our saint, we should take the relics back. But they don't particularly want to die. So they'd much rather tell the truth to the player characters than get in any more trouble or get tortured or killed. So the player characters work out what's going on. The players now know what's going on, and they've got a decision to make. What are they going to do with the relics? Okay, they're out in the middle of the woods. The brother from the priory says, well, they were housed at the priory, they were given to the priory, they were going to be stolen from the priory. I've saved them, we should take them back to the priory. The peasants go, no, this is a local saint, we should take her back to the lands where she lived, and where, until the relics were extorted from the previous baron, they used to lie. Players can side with either of these. But before we look at how that decision is made, let's look at how other groups play this. So let's now switch across to a second group. And here we have staying at the priory, same setup. You've got to appeal to the count to get permission. You're going to set up your settlement at the ruins. We have a knight. And our knight is accompanied by his sister, with whom he has a somewhat strained relationship, and her maidservant, who's the daughter of a forester, fairly heavily scarred, would much rather be holding on to a hatchet rather than doing the laundry and doing maidservant stuff, and a friend of theirs, who is a burly, heavily bearded bloke in a cloak which is flame red at the bottom and smoke black at the top, and the air virtually crackles with energy as he passes, and dogs howl and babies cry. If you've played Ars Magica, you'll be going, yep, that's the blatant gift, and that's a flambeau mage, and it is. The knight also is not just a knight. So he has a range of magical powers in addition to his combat abilities. So this is a much more obviously combat-heavy group. And this group is actually an excellent example of what happens when players really get into the Ars Magica rules and start specialising characters based on, well, my character's background is this, so these are the sorts of spells that he or she would have learned, and oh my god, that makes them terrifyingly powerful. So we're not talking about a farmer who might get control of a stick, we're talking about some fairly scary mages here. The prior being absent, the monks, having had their relics stolen, now turn to a knight. And the knight agrees to help, etc. Exactly the same start to the adventure. And the investigation then goes in a completely different direction. This group aren't particularly interested in people. They're not interested in chatting to peasants. They're not interested in understanding the background of the monks. So firstly, they thoroughly investigate physically the environment of the theft. They look for tracks. The forester's daughter finds footprints going out of the gate and going to a shed where it looks like some woodwork was done and somebody made some sort of frame so that they could drag something away, and there are those two lines, those two parallel paths disappearing off towards the road. So physical investigation from the forester's daughter works out that after no doors were broken, there was no forced entry, somebody from the inside took the relics, took them out, made a frame, dragged them off. Meanwhile, our knight has a spell which allows him to identify a person if he's got a thing intimate to that person, an arcane connection. So he immediately goes, right, monks, here's a bit of parchment, explain to me where the river runs, where the roads goes, makes himself a basic map, and then he gets hold of the blanket that Brother Gil has been sleeping under for the last 3 years, right, since Brother Gil is also missing. And he goes, right, map, blanket, where is the person who is associated with this blanket? Ah, there, east. They've now got 2 bits of information which both concur. The frame is being dragged off to the east. The map says the person who's under this blanket is east. Brilliant, they go. Without really talking to anybody or understanding anyone's motivations, missing monk, follow tracks, cast spell, let's go. Totally different investigation, they've got to the same place, which is how you always want an investigation to be set up. There should never just be one solution, right? So they head off, they head into the woods, same thing, slightly different approach to the monk. They're not trying to be friendly, they're threatening him. If you don't come out, we'll just burn the place down and you'll die. You don't want that, do you? That's not really winning him over. Some interesting interaction between the players, because the player who's playing the knight's daughter wants to take a talky approach. The person with the magical spells that create huge amounts of fire, if what you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? He's trying to threaten to burn the place down. And at this point, guard with a big axe and a bunch of peasants turn up. You lot, bugger off, we're taking our relics back. Now, the players are definitely up for testing out their combat abilities. They've designed these characters, they're going to enjoy them. Whereas our first group of players try to talk the attackers down, this lot are just, right, we'll show them. So the knight takes on the guy with the axe, and the knight has, amongst other abilities, a spell which allows him to shift his apparent location by about a metre. Makes him very difficult to fight. He's a highly skilled swordsman wearing tons of chainmail, and the enemy doesn't even know where he is because the enemy's attacking the wrong place. So that character is now, or the player is now, thoroughly enjoying the fight with this obvious big boss type axeman. The flambeau mage is set up to create large amounts of fire, generally area effects. So the whole battle area is now getting covered by huge fields of fire, and the peasants are falling and their corpses are becoming charred beyond recognition in a few seconds. The woman with the axe, the quotes maidservant, is sort of guarding one of the flanks, making sure nobody gets around the side, and the non-combatant daughter is kind of hiding at the back. Non-combatant sister is hiding at the back. So this is a huge fight where the players absolutely flex their characters' considerable muscles. They find themselves with 6 dead bodies and 2 injured peasants who they simply take prisoner. And now they're interrogating 2 injured, terrified prisoners, and they're talking to the monk. Right. So again, same situation that we had before. There's a conversation with some peasants and a conversation with the monk, but the actual conversation is running very differently, because now everybody involved is terrified. They've thrown around vast amounts of fire, nobody knows what's going on, confusion, fear, etc. Very different tone to the role-playing. But they're going to get to the same place. They end up with the same information. They understand that the peasants were sent by the Baron of Montrat to recover the relics, which was supposed to be stolen from the monastery, but this Brother Gil ran off with them before they could be stolen. Brother Gil wants them to go back to the priory. Who do the player characters back? Now, as a couple of other examples, these 2 groups were quite extreme, and we'll be following them as we go through this campaign diary because their approaches are so extreme. And unsurprisingly, they are both Ars Magica groups. Ars Magica lets people come up with quite weird, wonderful characters, and players tend to play to those characters. But we had a couple of other groups who took a slightly more middle-of-the-road approach to this, and we're going to call these, for reasons that will really be obvious, we're going to call these the Mithras group and the Dungeons and Dragons group, right? So the D&D group get to the encounter at the cottage where the monk is hiding, peasants turn up, roll for initiative, right? They just view it as a fight. They defeat the peasants. They take 2 of them prisoner in the end. I think I gave them 6 that they had to fight, so they kill 4. At this point, one of the player characters is on the ground, bleeding badly, having been brought down by an axe. If you're a first level bunch of characters facing a 28 hit point berserk axeman, he's a bit scary. But they deal with it, and then they heal themselves up and they get on with the conversation. And I mentioned the rules side of it because this is where we can see how much the rules impact the decisions that the players make. Because for the Ars Magica groups, they know that that big axe is scary. Their absolute focus has to be not getting hit by that axe. Because in Ars Magica, if they're incapacitated by that axe, they could die from their wounds later. It could take months and months to heal. D&D group, well, cleric's got healing. We can take some rests. We'll be fine. Doesn't matter. Right? Mithras group, they look at the big axe, and in Mithras, a good dice roll from the GM and a failed parry from a player character, you've got a dead player character. They run. They don't even stand and fight. The Mithras group just look at this big axe man and a couple of peasants backing him up, and they just go, we're out of here. Right? We're not dying for this. Now, this means of our 4 groups, 3 of them, the 2 Ars Magica groups and the D&D group, are talking to the survivors after the fight, and they're talking to the monk, and they're finding out what's happening. The Mithras group are doing something totally different. This is our intro adventure. This is supposed to be simple. But one of our 4 groups has now gone, right, we're not facing this fight, but we do want to find out where the relics are going. We want to be helpful to the priory. So our 2 sneakiest characters, after we run off, circle back, see where these people go. Our talky characters head off. There's a castle about 1.5 miles to the north. Go and tell the local baron. There's violent men in the woods attacking a monk. Right? We get that local baron involved. That's actually really useful as a GM because they're now making a connection with an NPC that I didn't expect them to make a connection with. Right? They're now getting involved with a different baron, with different peasants. Another player character goes off and just finds the nearest village. Right? Who's in charge of the village? Is there a reeve? Is there a lord of the manor? Can we raise a militia of peasantry? Right? That bloke with the axe, he's got a peasant militia. We'll get our own peasant militia. They now approach this totally differently. They're seeing it as a social challenge, not a combat encounter. Now, if we're saying that we're running a sandbox campaign where the players' decisions matter, then the most interesting thing isn't actually the individual encounters or anything to do with rolling dice. It's the decisions that the players make. It's how they approach the situations, the friends, the enemies, the allies that they make as a result of that, the moral quandaries that they struggle with. And already in our first introductory adventure, we've given the players a moral quandary to deal with. Who should own these relics? They have the power. They're in the middle of a wood. There are the relics. What are they going to do with them? And they've also got the freedom to handle this politically very differently. And we'll see how different groups do this. So we'll focus again mainly on our farmers, as I'm going to call them, and the group that I'm going to come to call the Shadows. The farmers is obvious, right? Gishard ex Bonasagus, our magical researcher who really wants to make the best farm ever, with his parish priest, Father Otto. They're the farmers. They take the moral high ground. They storm back to the city. They take Brother Gil and the stolen relics. They drop them off at the priory. And then they head to the Count's castle and they demand an audience with the Count because they have the most appalling conspiracy that they need to unearth. Right? They need to denounce a thief, a noble thief who has violated this priory and stolen sacred relics. They're outraged. Right? In character, they're outraged, and out of character, they're having fun playing this. So they find themselves standing in front of the Count, the big noble who rules this whole county, and they denounce the Baron of Montrat for having sent his people to steal these relics, right? That the Baron of Montrat has got people working for him inside the priory. He's got his bodyguard, he's got his peasant militia, and they're all here for one thing, which is to violate the sanctity of the priory and steal the sacred relics. How awful is that? Well, where is the Baron of Montrat? He never really comes down here. Oh, no, no, we've identified him. He's staying out in the fairground area. Right, we'll have him brought in. Baron of Montrat is brought in. We have nice, big, dramatic role-playing event. The angry, stroppy Baron, aging, foul-tempered bloke, doesn't deny anything, but he just shoots his mouth off about how dare anybody accuse me, and who has the right to speak to me like this, and if they say anything like that, if they accuse me of anything like that, they'll regret it. Which obviously gives the players the opportunity for Father Otto, the non-combatant, unarmed priest, to stand up and face down the Baron in front of the whole court. Right, we get a nice big dramatic scene. At which point the Count says that this is absolutely terrible and the Baron should be punished for this, and imposes a huge fine, a ridiculous amount of silver that the Baron can never pay on the Baron, and says, to make good on this terrible crime that you've fomented, you must pay me this huge amount of silver. The Baron shouts and rants and storms out, and we've just set up a really big dramatic set of relationships. When we started this campaign, the Count and the Baron of Montrat are a little bit tense with each other. The Baron doesn't really want to swear fealty to the Count. The Count thinks the Baron should bend the knee. And now we've taken it and turned it into this big, dramatic, you appalling person, you've done this terrible crime, you must pay a huge sum of money. Right? We've ratcheted up the tension here quite a lot. Meanwhile, the players are now not on good terms with the Baron of Montrat, who they discover is going to be their nearest neighbour. And if we look at the map, the Castle of Montrat is just north of the ruins where the player characters are going to be setting up their settlement. So they've just won a lot of admiration from people. The priory, the other churchmen, the bishop is going to be impressed. The Count is equally impressed that this mere priest stood up in front of the Baron and spoke the truth and denounced this terrible crime. Lots of people are impressed, but that Baron is angry with them. Right? They killed his bodyguard, they've denounced him, they've made him look a fool, and now he's been told he has to pay an insane amount of silver that he can never raise. He's really angry with them. By contrast, and this is where I start thinking of the other group as the Shadows, as you'll see, because initially they seem very in your face. Right? We have Wolfgang von Hornbach ex-Gerberton, the knight who is actually a mage. Right? Illusion magics, sword, armour, quite a scary combatant, very into beautiful music and fine tasting food and living the courtly life, but fairly direct in his approach. And Magnus ex Flambeau, who is setting fire to everything within sight when a combat starts. These guys are quite in your face, but we haven't really seen very much from Anna von Hornbach yet, who is the sister of the Gerberton mage, of the knight. And now she comes into her own. Her player had basically nothing to do during the combat. She's a non-combatant character. But now they have fun. So they tie up the two injured survivors, leave them in the hut, and they head back to town. And they drop off the monk and the relics. And they say, look, don't say anything about this. We'll handle this. We will speak quietly to the bishop, make sure he knows what's going on. We'll get his advice on what the Count should be told. We don't want your priory to come to any... we don't want them to have any kind of negative feedback from this, right? If people think you were stolen from, you might look bad. Let's just keep this quiet, shall we? Now, the monks don't have a prior in charge. We've deliberately set up this situation so they're leaderless, so that the players can do this kind of thing, right? So they agreed to stay silent. And yes, somebody does go. Wolfgang, our in-your-face knight, goes and tells the bishop that somebody stole these relics, but they've now been recovered. But this is all really just to buy time, because what's happening is Anna, the knight's younger sister, is heading into the marketplace to look for the nobleman who sent off his big axe-wielding bodyguard and his peasants. And they find him. She finds Baron Robert of Montrat and says, "Oh, my Lord Baron, something terrible has happened. I was travelling with my brother and his friend out to the east of here, and we were set upon by brigands. I don't know if your lordship is planning on travelling east, but I thought really you should be aware of the danger on the roads. There was this big man with an axe, and he had a group of peasants with him, and they were very violent. I thought you'd like to know, right? And the Baron's like, okay, so what happened? He said, oh, well, there were 6 of them, and they set upon my brother and his friend. Yes, but what happened? Well, there were only 6 of them, my Lord Baron. So there's this kind of sweet, smiling, diplomatic knight's daughter, but underneath it there is this, we know it was you. You sent 6 people. We slaughtered them. There were only 6. We were only outnumbered 3-1. We're not that bothered kind of attitude. So he's aware that he's being warned, he's aware that this is being covered up, and he's aware that his people have been killed. But then she says, 2 of them have survived. We've tied them up, and we thought maybe we should tell the Count where they are so that he can fetch them and interrogate them and find out who they're working from. But my lord, perhaps you'd like to take responsibility for that. And she's now giving him the opportunity to cover up what's happened. So by the time news filters through from the Priory and the Bishop to the Count, and the Count sends people out to the wood, the Baron of Montrat has gone and fetched his 2 surviving people and legged it. So our shadows, who start off being really in your face, the knight with the illusion magic and the flambeau mage spreading fire everywhere, have now turned super devious. And they've covered this whole thing up. The relics are back at the Priory. So whereas our first group, the farmers, made an enemy of the Baron of Montrat, they publicly denounced him. Here, this group that I'm starting to think of as the Shadows, they've covered up for him, and he knows they've covered up, but they've also kind of intimidated him, and they've killed somebody he cared about, which was his bodyguard. So there's a really ambivalent situation that they've set up with the Baron there. In both cases, the Priory has got the relics, and the other groups. Similarly, we end up in different situations. So the D&D group did the completely straightforward, take the relics back to the Priory and then inform the correct authorities of what's happened. And they didn't make a big deal of it, and it didn't become theatrical. But again, the situation between the Count and the Baron of Montrat degenerates a little bit. The Mithras group, I didn't want to make it too easy for them. Oh great, you've run away from the fight and you've got some other people to fight for you, you can get the relics back. So I ruled that the Baron's men got away with the relics, but the players have concluded the investigation, they've shown that they're doing the right thing, they're following the trail back towards Montrat, they kind of make it clear to everybody who is responsible. So in this case, again, the players aren't particularly popular with the Baron of Montrat, but they haven't raised themselves up. They haven't stood directly against him. So there isn't that much bad blood. And they've allowed him to keep the relics, not by decision, but just because they didn't want to fight for them. So again, after this first little introductory adventure, everything has changed for each of these groups. Noble relationships have changed. They have different friends, they have different allies. In one of the 4 cases, the relics have gone north to Montrat. In the other 3 cases, they've gone back to the Priory. So even in a nice, simple introductory adventure, this is giving an idea how the player's actions will form their relationships and change the world around them and start changing the ongoing narrative as it goes forward. And we'll certainly see that with the Baron of Montrat in future videos. So that's our first introductory adventure for the House of the Crescent Sun, and the next video will look at how different groups of players dealt with the politics of introducing themselves to the Count, and how they decided to set up their settlement, and how that then set them up to have very different experiences of the campaign going forward.